Hello, my name is Dr. Erica Liggins, licensed clinical psychologist and exam coach. I want to thank you so much for tuning into this recording today. When I initially launched the Friends and Family page on my website, it did not include resources for colleagues. However, after many years of coaching, I began to realize that the influence of colleagues is just as important to a test taker's success as the influence of friends and family. And so you've been invited to listen to this recording today to learn some tips on how you can be helpful. More than likely, if you're listening to this recording, you are likely either a newly licensed psychologist who is a colleague of someone I'm coaching, or you might be planning to take this test as well. Lastly, you could even be a colleague who is from a slightly different discipline, like maybe you're a social worker or a licensed clinical counselor or something like that. So at first I want to talk about what this test is all about. Again, if you've already taken this will feel a little bit like review, but I will go over this quickly. As we know, the EPPP is required for licensure for licensed clinical psychologists. Part 1 of the exam is a knowledge-based exam that covers 11 different content areas, and it basically feels like you're taking 11 different classes at the same time as you're preparing for it. It takes on average 3 to 6 months to prepare, with about 15 to 20 hours per week of hard work. This is what experts recommend. And most of the content that's featured on the exam is either unfamiliar or can be written in strange ways, which of course makes this exam very difficult and anxiety-provoking. First, I would like to talk about what you should avoid when trying to provide support to test takers. First of all, please do not underestimate the power of your influence. It's a part of human nature to care what our peers think about us. So when you talk about the test and your experience, or you comment on their experience, remember that your words have power. Which brings me to the next thing. Please be careful about minimizing how hard the test is. I understand that maybe in your experience, if you've already taken it, perhaps you no longer feel connected to the anxiety around it, or maybe you had a very positive, easy experience. And so it may be easy to look at someone and say, oh, you're stressing too much, or it's just another test, you'll be fine, because you don't know what their experiences are, and they could be feeling a lot of anxiety and feel very invalidated if you say things like that. So if you are going to compare your experiences, I would only do so if your experiences are similar. So again, if you had an easier experience and they're having a really hard time, you don't want to say things like, well, I had, an easy time passing this. What's wrong with you? We definitely don't want to do that. But if you have an experience that is looking very similar, like maybe you failed the test a few times, but were able to overcome that and pass, and you see they're struggling, it can be helpful to say to them, hey, listen, I failed the first couple times too. It felt really sad when it happened, but just know that you can overcome that. Okay, so that's a way that we'd want to compare our experience that's actually helpful. You also want to be careful of any type of criticism, criticizing their performance, their study habits, anything like that. And of course, you do not want to question their competency or ability to be successful in the field just because they have either had a difficult time passing the exam or preparing for the exam. You'd be surprised how often I hear this. People will say things like, my colleague, I opened up to them and I told them that I failed, and they said, well, do you think you're really cut out for this field? And maybe that person was trying to be helpful. Maybe they thought that they were saving them the trouble of trying to pass a test that maybe they're not meant to pass or something. But that's really not for you to decide. It is not up to a colleague to decide or make any type of references or opinions about a person's competency. This test really has nothing to do with how competent people are out in the field. And so making that connection doesn't even make any sense, and it just makes people feel bad about themselves. If there are any questions about their competency, that is for their supervisor to deal with. So as a colleague, you just want to stick to being supportive. The next thing I want you to avoid is to ask about their exact test date, because I strongly encourage my coaching clients to tell as few people as possible. It helps to relieve the pressure, and if they were to have a failed attempt, it makes it a lot easier to not have to go back and tell a lot of people. Now, if they did trust that very confidential, sacred information with you, please do not share it with other people. Very important. So make sure you don't do that. The next thing is to avoid assuming that you know how to motivate them. Everyone's different. People work in different ways. So don't think that you know exactly what's going to be supportive to them. Next, if they are trying to study at work because your job allows that, please do not bother them while they're trying to study. You may be working with a colleague who has kids at home and they really value that sacred time to be able to study at work. But if you're kind of going in there wanting to chit chat and consult every 5 seconds, then that's going to make it difficult for them. And lastly, I want you to avoid telling them things that go against their coach's study plan. So I've had coaching clients in the past present with a lot of anxiety because their colleagues are telling them how to study for the exam that's in direct conflict with the plan that I have for them. Or they're saying things like, well, I didn't do all that when I studied. Why is your coach making you do that? But here's what you have to remember. Although your experience of passing the exam, if you've already taken it, and the way you went about it was a very valid and successful experience for you, you have only gotten yourself through this experience. Versus a coach like myself who has several years of experience and who has worked with several different types of people with different lifestyles and needs and preferences, there may be distinct ways in which I'm coaching them to study that are very different from the way you studied because they're a very different person with very different needs, some of which you may not be aware of. For example, you might identify as neurotypical, and your colleague, on the other hand, may have ADHD, anxiety, and other things that make them have to learn in a very different way. And again, you may not have that awareness, but I, as their coach, I do. And so therefore, their whole entire coaching plan has been created taking in those unique things about them. So just support them and encourage them to give coaching a try and really follow the recommendations. And if something isn't working for them, encourage them to talk to their coach about their needs. So now that you know what not to do, let's talk about some things that you can do that can be really helpful to your colleague as they're preparing for their exam. So first of all, be sure to be understanding that your relationship dynamic as colleagues is going to temporarily change. So let's say you're used to chatting and eating lunch together, or maybe it's a ritual to every day gather up your things and walk home or walk to the cars or bus station or whatever together. You may find that they might want to study during their lunch break. So you might have a little bit of a lonely lunch hour for a period of time, but remember, it's just temporary. Also, if your team is really cohesive, maybe you all like to go out after work on a regular basis for happy hour or get-togethers, you may notice that they might say, hey guys, I've got to study, I can't come, or they just come for a little bit and then they leave. Lastly, again, because they may have to use part of their work hours to study, again, if that's permitted, you may notice that they just may not be as available for consultation. chatting, venting about things, and so you just have to make sure that you're respectful. Next, it is okay to provide encouragement verbally if you and them are spiritual people and you want to pray for them. Of course, you can do that. You can write notes of encouragement, send a positive email or something like that. Also, when you know their study schedule and you know when they plan to study at work, if they're doing that, then you also can be sure to leave them alone during study time and give them the space that they need. But of course, you won't know unless you know when they plan to study. And last but not least, remember to always ask. If you want to provide encouragement, ask, hey, what type of encouragement is best for you? Do you want me to ask about this test, or would you rather talk about it when you're ready? Those are the types of things that you want to know, because you don't want anyone to feel backed into a corner or feel even more overwhelmed and stressed out than they need to feel. If you just simply ask what they need from you, then you will know how to best show up and support them. In conclusion, I want to thank you again for taking the time to listen to this recording. Your influence during this process is so important, and the support you provide is vital for their success. So let's work together to help our test taker to crush that exam.